Okay, so this session, I'm delighted to host this session, which is about implementing sustainable practices in banking. You will see that this is a banking-only panel. We here have 3 panelists representing banks that have signed the Principles for Responsible Banking. From different contexts, the US, Puerto Rico, and as well as Canada, as well as different bank types and business models here. For those of you who don't know the Principles for Responsible Banking, they're the world's foremost voluntary framework for sustainable banking. They are rather new compared to, for example, the PRI. So they have been launched in September 2019. But we have experienced considerable growth in terms of the number of signatories. So there's a lot more than 300 signatories to the principles now that represent collectively close to half of global banking assets. And what is important to understand about the principles as a framework per se is that at the center, at the core of the principles is the term impact and portfolio, basically. So banks that sign up to the principles, they take a commitment to align the practices, the strategies with the vision that society has developed in the Sustainable Development Goals and the SDGs, as well as in the Paris Climate Agreement. And that ultimately then means that banks would analyze the impact that's associated with the core banking activities, with the financing investment activities, and then set targets to address these impacts. So we've spoken a lot about climate in the recent panel. If one can translate that into the greenhouse gas emission scope terminology, it's less about scope 1 and scope 2, it's about scope 3 emissions, it's about financed emissions, so it's about the impact that is caused by a bank's core business. And we do not only consider climate here, we talk about the whole broad spectrum of things associated with sustainable development. So this is a bit about the principles. My name's Johanna Dichtel. I'm leading a team that is developing guidance for how to implement the principles. We will focus a lot about what has been going on in the last 3 years. These panelists will share a lot of the experiences, but we will also open it up at the end of the session to questions, to comments from the room, because the principles themselves are very much in the spirit of collaboration, so we want to learn from one another, and we will then have 10 or 15 minutes or so, so please, if you have any questions, reserve them, and then we'll pass over to the room. Okay, it's my pleasure here now to welcome my 3 panelists. I have with me, to the very right, Yasmina Bucina. She's the CSO and SVP Strategic Partnerships at Areti Bank, a recently incorporated international bank in Puerto Rico that has being sustainable, digital, and human as its mission. Yasmina is committed to expanding the bank's positive impact in society and the environment and to give access to people in the Latin American region, but also globally. With previous experience in the field of business development, she's built strategic public-private partnerships and created initiatives for public relations and business development that she's now bringing to Areti. Thanks for being here. Thank you. Next one is Ivan Frischberg. Ivan is the CSO at Amalgamated Bank, where he leads the firm's work on CSR and the strategy on ESG integration as part of the executive leadership team. Ivan has been instrumental in rallying bank sector commitments to combat climate change, which includes growing the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, PCAF. And Amalgamated as a bank has also taken a lot of leadership within UNEP FI in helping develop guidance for banks how to set targets to reduce financed emissions. Amalgamated Bank is also on the steering group of the NISBA, of the NTBA, and Ivan is also a member of the advisory panel for chief funds and was recently appointed to the US Treasury Department's Climate-Related Financial Risk Advisory Committee. Thanks for being here as well. And last but not least, we have with us Maud Sinide. She has a senior advisory role in the Sustainable Development ESG team at the National Bank of Canada, where she's been part of the bank's ESG journey since the beginning. She works on external disclosures and questionnaires from ESG rating agencies, in addition to also demystifying sustainable development requirements of different stakeholders. National Bank of Canada is also founding signatories of the principles and a member of the Net Zero Banking Alliance. So thank you to the three of you for being here. Okay, before we move to the implementation of the principles, the setting targets, but then also bringing them into action, one very crucial step in the beginning is the topic of governance. So having governance structures in place is quite crucial. Ivan, Amalgamated is one of the PRB banks that has very strong governance mechanisms in place. Can you please share with the audience here how your governance structures have helped you implement the PRB? What was, for example, particularly helpful to set up the governance in your bank?
Well, thank you. So the first thing, when PRB was founded, I'll tell you, I prepared a whole memo to our CEO at the time. It was a very long, thorough memo on what it would meant, the reporting requirements, and he just wrote back, no brainer, which is a little bit great and a little bit demoralizing because I felt like, all right, I could have done it in half a page. But it was a no-brainer because the shift that PRB was making was to say that this is an alliance around banking not being a passive sort of player in the economy, but actually having a responsibility to its external stakeholders. So it's not just sort of the fiduciary interests of investors into the bank, but it really is about the communities that we serve, our clients, and having an impact there. And that is a huge shift, right? Because everything else in our world, from the regulatory guidance to TCFD, it's really thinking about, risk to, for investors that sits within the companies that they're investing in. And this was a shift to thinking about stakeholders in a dramatically different way. It's now, I think, been a lot more socialized. Even the Business Roundtable in the US has grand words about stakeholder capitalism and those sorts of things that are getting them in trouble now. But for us, the first step after we joined the Principles for Responsible Banking was actually to shift the structure of the company. So we had been recently, had gone public as a company, but we moved to a public benefit corporation status so that it was built into our charter and our incorporation documents that we were not just serving those sort of fiduciary interests. And that is sort of a fundamental, I think, governance mechanism that sort of expresses what the whole point of PRB is. And for us, it was a defensive one to be able to say that the company wanted to be able to execute on these missions without putting itself at risk as a publicly traded company. The second piece is that the board has a very strong and engaged hand in all of this work. So I report to what is now the Executive and Corporate Social Responsibility Committee. So it had been the Executive Committee of the board, and now it covers both their traditional functions, but also looks at our ESG and CSR work. So I'm regularly reporting to them, and our board is incredibly engaged in this work. And that is important because they need to be from a sort of responsibility perspective, but it also sends a signal within the company to all of the business lines and functions and departments of the bank that this is a high priority and that this is sort of an enterprise-wide commitment that's being made.
Thanks so much, Ivan. Maud, my next question goes to you, also about governance. Do you actually agree with what I said in the beginning, that governance is crucial to then move forward on the implementation and sustainability journey? And can you maybe also share how the governance process within the National Bank of Canada works?
Absolutely. So yes, absolutely. I definitely agree that it's crucial. At National Bank of Canada, also the board of directors adopted in 2019 9 ESG principles, and these are really the core of everything we put into place in terms of ESG. So we have in the E pillar, we have the aim is to develop a green economy, in the S to enrich communities, and in the G to govern according to the highest standards. All board committees have ESG responsibilities, so risk management, audit, HR, conduct review, and corporate governance. And we have an ESG working group, which is led by the Chief Finance Officer, and is really responsible for defining the strategy and supporting key initiatives in implementing the ESG strategy. And also for making sure we implement the recommendations from the PRBs, from TCFD. And the team I am part of, so the ESG specialized team, is really responsible in the execution part, so executing the strategy and working with the different lines of business. And also, since the 1st of November 2021, executive compensation is linked to ESG priorities. So then we make sure that the ESG strategy is really integrated into the business strategy. And if I may, I'd like to add a point. We're talking about governance, but I think that something that is really important, and even in the ESG journey and the PRB implementation, it's culture. Culture is very important because governance will be the who does what, and the culture is really the why. And sometimes the key learning is we underestimate the importance of really understanding the requirements, but making sure that the whole organization and even at an individual level, that we understand why we are doing this. And I think that when everybody understands beyond the disclosure, the accountability, that's when we all move in the same direction. And it's interesting because we talked about it. One thing we did, and it might seem simple, is an ESG training. And now we have the PRB Academy also that helps in this common understanding.
Thank you so much, Maud, and I couldn't agree more that culture is quite fundamental to bring everybody along on the journey. And that maybe leads me to Yasmina, the prompt culture, because Areti is a bank really born out of this concept. So can you share with the audience how that the PRB will help you, you as a kind of a newly established bank?
Yes, sure. First, I have to say that I love the colors in our panel because it represents the green and the blue in the planet.
30%?
Yes.
What am I?
Well, you have blue something where? Next time, green suit. Anyway, yeah, I wanted to share also a little bit of the story inside Areti. So this was a project that actually started many years ago. I was doing my master's degree and I have this friend, and we actually ended up working together at a development bank. And then soon after that, he became a very successful banker. And I stayed working with the social banking and the nonprofit sector. And then years after that, that's probably 8 years ago, he decided he wanted to actually build a bank from scratch to do a real impact in the planet. And he called me and he said, "Are you interested?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." So we're talking about PRB was not even created. And after PRB was created, we said, I mean, we have to join this incredible banks that started this initiative. So we're very committed to have signed being part of UNEP and PRB soon. And Areti is very conveying inside its business model because we take capital input from our clients and we transform inside with the 17 SDGs. And we have created 4 macro areas, and all these 17 SDGs are represented into these 4 macro areas. And then, the consequence, of course, is direct positive impact in society and the environment. And also, I would say that our sustainability policy has a lot of influence from the principles, specifically in our lending assessment framework. We categorize the projects into 4 categories, and of course, with the impact that they make. And that's probably, of course, taken and being inspired by the principles. So I think that in our daily operations and also inside our internal policies, PRB is helping and guiding the way. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Yasmina. Moving away from the topic of governance, the internal structures that need to happen, of course, we want to see action. This is why we're here. We want to see banks setting targets, but then also making those actionable. Amongst the PRB signatories, the vast majority focus on climate as one of the 2 targets that need to be set underneath the framework as a minimum requirement. So more than 90% have climate targets in place. So we will talk about a bit about climate action, more from the like what experiences have you made setting targets. Of course, amalgamated here comes to mind first, because you were the first US bank to set and have validated climate targets under the SBTi, as well as the first US bank to set portfolio-wide targets under the UN guidelines for climate target setting. So Ivan, can you share with us where you currently stand in your bank with regards to setting targets, but then also putting those into action?
First of all, I'm reconsidering my choice of colors for today, but I'll sort of say to Joy, I'm going to get transitioned out maybe as the gray here, and we're going to move to completely blue and green, and that's our collective objective. We, as in terms of our climate commitments, our targets, we got a really good head start on the benchmarking and baselining through PCAF, and we'd really started that work in 2017, and so it was not easy work. We ultimately, in 2021, disclosed our 2019 and 2020 data, and it took that long to really get the methodologies, get our kind of internal systems, and get that work. We had hoped to have done it a year earlier and kept pushing back so that we released 2 years in one. But once that work was done, the target setting work was actually quite easy, and it allowed us to move quite quickly to our NZBA and SBTi targets. How it's going from here is sort of also, it's a mixed bag, right? We're ahead in a bunch of places. There's some places where we have work to do. We have, and I think this is indicative of how it's going to, I hope, go for everybody, which is we're going to learn as we go, and there are places where we're going to do better, and there's places that are going to be more difficult. The places where it's going better is on clean energy, and so all of our projections for what we were going to do in that space, we were sort of far outstripping those, and that creates a bunch of headroom if you think about it from an aggregate target perspective. The places where I would say it's also going well, but still to be seen, is for the parts of the economy where we're really dependent on policy. So when we did our targets, we modeled in the policies of the markets and the book that we had to see how it was going to be impacted when a jurisdiction set their own targets for clean electricity, right? Because if we know that we're banking the real estate sector in New York or Washington, D.C. or California, and they move to electrification, and that's clean energy instead of dirty energy, that is going to actually reduce emissions in our portfolio in a way that we could never do alone. And so we had both modeled that into our targets, and then we've been an active participant in things like state-level policies as well as things like the Inflation Reduction Act. I would mention that we're kind of alone in that. U.S. banks were sitting on their hands during that debate around the Inflation Reduction Act and not engaging. And so they're going to make a lot of money. We're all going to make a lot of money off the Inflation Reduction Act. That part is going very well. Be a lot more clean energy. But we didn't put our shoulder into it as a community to enable those things to happen, which I think is a problem, and one that I hope that we're going to kind of change as we get into the NZBA target setting guidelines. But we will see how that work plays out, because it's going to be a lot easier for us to decarbonize as the real economy decarbonizes than it is to try to really then get in and pick and choose and say, okay, we can't do your building because you're not in a position to retrofit, and so we're going to take you out of the portfolio. Those sorts of things aren't going to work well. the systems that we have for engaging with clients, the understanding of sector scenarios, the understanding of like what our clients can do, their own ability to benchmark and to do this work, I think that is all still nascent. But it's part of the impact of the global alliance, is that really this common approach and common objective and the systems we're using are starting to become a sort of value chain throughout the economy that we can all work to. And so that work, I think, we're behind, but it's happening.
One follow-up question to you, Ivan. Of course, the regulatory context is always quite important for these. And since you're the US bank here, would you like to comment on the recent regulatory developments in the US?
I mean, you've heard some of the conversation about it here today, and in my reflection on it, at a regulatory level, there is this danger of fragmentation. And I commented to the grant, from a Canadian perspective, I don't think you would hear U.S. regulators talking like that without some fear now of political consequences, and that's a dangerous thing. And I think the U.S. is putting itself in a very dangerous position with respect to what is a global financial system to be in this increasingly isolated position. And it's going to be bad for financial institutions. It's going to be bad for the country. And so that is the impact on this on the U.S. is real. And it's refreshing to fly so short a distance from where I live in Washington to hear a completely different conversation about this. So I think it's real. I think it is certainly having a chilling impact on the banking sector in which we all operate. But I also don't see any of the banks or asset managers or real economy companies in moving away from their commitments. I think it's just the chill that's being created is something that we're all going to have to navigate until the folks in Congress grow up a little bit.
Thanks so much, Ivan. Maud, the National Bank of Canada is also a member of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, has made a lot of progress towards setting climate targets. Would you share where you stand? What progress have you made? What are your next steps?
Yes, absolutely. So we joined in 2021 the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and last year we disclosed the first intermediate target for the oil and gas producer sector, so for financed emission reduction. And pretty soon, so we're working on our next disclosure, the TCFD report. We'll be disclosing 2 other intermediate targets for power generation and for commercial real estate. So that's where we're at on our path to the Net Zero Banking Alliance commitment. And we're also, I think we've talked about regulations, and what we're also looking at is working with our peers, with organizations to improve our risk management framework and also our disclosure.
Thanks so much, Maud. Now moving away from climate, of course, the second most prominent impact areas that PRB signatories are focusing on is financial health and inclusion. So it's really about the customers of a bank, inclusion being an aspect that is rather relevant for developing countries, whereas the resilience and health aspects is more for developed contexts. Now, Yasmina, question to you, because we have a mega trend of digitalization, of course, and Areti is a digital bank as well. How does technology help your bank, become more inclusive? And can you describe what your approach looks like to financial inclusion and what aspects you're planning to tackle?
Sure. Well, being an international bank and a digital bank per se, that gives us the characteristic of being an inclusive bank, because anyone, anywhere in the planet can actually access to our products and services. So we are very happy to have signed the commitment for financial health and inclusion, and we have put that into one of our targets. And globally, we think that what we want to do is, as the framework says, is to leave no one behind. We believe that everyone should have the opportunity to be bankerized and to have this access to banks. And also, for example, in the Latin American region, this region and many others in the world are places where economical uncertainty and inflation and devalued currencies happened. It's a fact. And I should actually know a little bit about that. I come from one of those countries, and I remember being younger and saving for my master's. And then all of a sudden, my money was worth half of it. And I wish I had a bank, or I was a client at a bank at that time, that would give me some financial health advice, or even give me the opportunity to diversify my savings in a less volatile currency, such as the US dollar. And I believe also we understand those markets. We also are interested in markets where, unfortunately, climate-related events have happened, whether related to, climate-related or not. And then also, we're interested in underserved jurisdictions. For example, there are a couple of countries in Central America where having a bank account is a luxury. Even if you have a job, even if you have all the references and the letters and everything that a bank can ask for, it's really difficult. So we want to aim for everyone and for those people, and we want to be inclusive in our services.
Thanks so much. Anything any from you would like to add on the topic of inclusion or financial health of your customers? No? Okay, we can move on. No, absolutely fine. Let's move on to one other very integral aspect. That's the aspect of sustainable finance. It's about business opportunities, of course, as well. So what is the National Bank of Canada here doing with regards to sustainable finance? Can you maybe share what products you have developed, how this has been going for you so far?
Yeah, of course, thank you. So National Bank Investments is a provider based on an open architecture. So we have what we call the OP4 plus process. So operations, people, performance, portfolio, and the plus is really integrating ESG criteria. So in the last year, NBI has issued 4 sustainability ETFs, exchange traded funds, also that are aligned with the SDGs. On the sustainable bond side, NBC issued put in place one of the first Canadian framework for issuing social bonds based on the green principles and the social principles. And the issues that have been done until now are really focused on affordable housing, renewable energy, basic and essential services. On the institutional corporate side, so commercial banking, we also have green loans, sustainability-linked loans, transition loans. And if we look at personal banking, we have a preferential rate for electric and hybrid vehicles through our loyalty program for credit cards. Clients can also offset their carbon credits. So rather than buying a product, of course, they can compensate. The best option would be to really reduce at source, but we make this option available. And I think once again, we talk about sustainable finance, and it is a competitive environment. We talk about numbers, and most of us are bankers. But once again, I think a key learning in the implementation journey is taking a step back and looking at the big picture. And it's interesting to see that, yes, we're providing different products, but it's also about making the transition, the just transition where everybody comes together. And it's not just about one institution. There won't be one winner or one leader that has the best sustainable products. It's really the transition is making sure all the different types of clients, and we do it together. So local, regional, we are today, but also on a more global scale.
Thanks so much, Moadora. As the banking board that it represents, every signatory of the principles, put it in the very beginning of the journey. Collaboration really is the new competition here. We cannot compete against each other to reach the Sustainable Development Goals as well as Paris Climate Agreement. So this Was a very good prompt. We now have 15 minutes left. I'd have a lot of follow-up questions to the panelists, but it's not about me, so I would open up now to the floor. If you have any questions, please let us know. Mustafa will come. And then also ask your question. Please let us know who you represented, who you would like to ask the question to. Thanks.
Hi there, thanks so much. My name is George Benson and I work for the City of Vancouver's Economic Development Agency. I'm particularly curious in what our colleague from National Bank was saying about the opportunities side. And I'm interested from whether from the ETF or some of the other investment products you're putting together, how are you thinking about pipeline? How are you cultivating the stream of opportunities that you're looking for? Because I can say, on the side of like local economic developers at the city level, we're looking at the landscape of projects and we're looking to feed those to partners who can be investors. And so I'm curious, one, what does that project discovery process look for you folks? And then if you can give us a sense of the filters that you're using in that. Is it, just the general alignment to your ESG principles? Are there other sort of, just generally, what are the things that you're looking for in those? Because I think we're very well aware that there's lots of money looking for projects, but we also understand, talking to financiers, that a lot of those projects are just not market ready. They need support. They need to be coached and supported to get to a level where they're ready for prime time, so to speak. So just getting that sense from for any of the other panelists here, how are you thinking about your pipeline of projects would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'm going to deceive you a bit because I'm not an expert in how this criteria is. But if you want, I can give you really the contact on the NBI side to really have because it's a very specific question in terms of criterias. So on the ESG specialized team, I don't have that specific view, but I understand the question and I'll give you the contact name afterwards for the answer. Thank you. I don't know if
I have one example from, we do a bunch of clean energy financing. It's a lot easier to do that with bigger, more experienced developers. They come in, they're ready, everything looks better, it's just easier for the underwriters and the team to do it. We also get approached by a lot of younger developers or newer entrants into the market, or they're mission-based, so they're trying to do not just clean energy, solar in a field, but they're actually trying to do community-owned solar or things that return benefits to the community, and it's a lot harder for us, and they're not ready. And it's hard to try to turn them away and say, you need to go back and get your stuff together, right? And so, so we started working with the U.S. Department of Energy and sort of sharing these experiences with them, and their solar programs office created, it has a different name now, but it was the Credit Ready Solar Program. So they spent a lot of time with us and a set of other banks saying, okay, what do you need to see when a developer comes into you, right? What do the financials look like? What are your credit terms? What are the, and they just give us the thing that we can then train those developers. So they went then through a process, and it's really about building that community for the Department of Energy, building that community of young developers, giving them sort of additional capacity, helping them to get ready. They kind of graduate from that program with a certification that in theory then they're kind of entering the marketplace really ready to do business. And from the finance institution's perspective, we kind of know, oh, you came through that program, you're going to have your stuff together. So I think a lot of these places, I think similar work in different jurisdictions is happening around the built environment and how cities and building owners and financial institutions are all coming together in a kind of roundtable space to be able to develop how are we going to do this and doing it in a collaborative way. And I think that's, that's the environment in which we kind of all learn how we're going to get sort of the available capital out the door and into things that are really making a difference in the real economy.
Any other questions from the audience?
If there are none, I'd have definitely one follow-up question for you. Then we can close the panel. It's close to 5 minutes to go before lunch break. My question would be around challenges that you've been facing, but of course we don't want to focus on what's been so difficult and everything so far, but also like what are your solutions? How do you overcome them? And maybe also what are your next steps then to be followed?
Yes, okay. So I guess one of the first challenge, it's capacity building. And we're a very small team. We're two today, we're half of the team, the ESG team today, but I think it's important that there is really an internal ecosystem. We don't have the answers to everything, but it's really about working together and focusing on experts, and not just experts internally, but also UNEP FI experts. I think at the beginning, we hesitated a lot because when you're at the beginning of the journey, you're more in an observation mode. But reaching out is really, really important, and also taking part, even if you're not really advanced in the journey, taking part in the working groups. We're now also in the financial inclusion capacity building program. So it's really scaling, even when you're a small team, about making sure that capacity building relies on the programs that are available.
Yeah, I can share something also. Well, as I have mentioned before, we are a newly incorporated bank, and we just started our journey with PRB. And we just started to study our impact. And one of the challenges that we have encountered after joining PRB is that having been born as a sustainable bank, some of the actually implementation framework that applies to other banks that are transforming is totally different. So in a way, we can apply some of the recommendations, but also it has been a very interesting work with the PRB, specifically with the Financial Health and Inclusion team and us, to adapt this framework to us since we were actually born sustainable. So I think you can call it a challenge, but it's just like something that has happened or not. And it's interesting to see, and I'm glad we are glad to bring that new, different approach to the principles.
First of all, I think, Yasmin, what you're talking about in your bank, and you think about challenges. So maybe we're all sitting here thinking about our challenges, but if you think about dealing with currency crises and failing economies and how to deliver banking services in a way that promotes social equity and deals with the climate crisis, that's a challenge, right? So, anytime I think things are difficult, I'm going to I'll reach out. And you can
It
tell
is
me
a challenge,
story.
in fact, yeah, but it's part of why we were born, and it's part of our even own personal experiences have happened. And I think even though it is a challenge, we kind of have that cover before we even existed, so yeah.
And the only other thing I'd add is, and it's about that sort of mission orientation, which is, and Sherry, you say, we make thousands of decisions all the time within these institutions. And sometimes the most powerful decision we make is to say no. And I think that's we're used to doing that on certain terms, on credit terms, for example, inside the banking sector. But being able to do that in other spaces, non-financial spaces, I think is going to become equally important. And so this is our ability internally to say no to things that might sound good or be good financially, or that they'd perform fine, but say no to them from a mission perspective, and because they don't fall within our targets, I think that's just sort of a powerful thing for us, and it allows us to focus on where we think we can make a difference, whether it's the just hell yes, or whether it's the yes, but here's how we want to do it to help you with that transition. And so I think, but the power to say no is I think one of the things that gets us through, and the clarity around that gets us through the challenging times.
Thanks so much. I think we're at the end of the panel. Maybe to give a quick outlook in terms of what is on our agenda for next year, or for this year, sorry. I mean, we've talked a lot about climate, but we have a global biodiversity framework since last year. There will be sessions today as well as tomorrow is about nature, but nature and biodiversity is one of our big as well priorities moving forward in order to develop guidance, how to set targets here. Of course, banks continue on their journey, but we need to look into those areas that are a bit more nascent with regards to target setting. So biodiversity is one of them, as well as climate adaptation, which has been a bit overlooked on the agenda so far. Of course, there's a lot of focus on climate mitigation, but we will start addressing adaptation on a portfolio-wide target setting level more and more, together then also with the elements of just transition and bringing things together again. Of course, one needs to address topics to reduce complexity from a, for example, greenhouse gas emissions perspective, but there's more than greenhouse gas emissions, so we are trying to consider interlinkages between things more and more. So this is a bit of an outlook in terms of the work plan for this year. And with that, I say thank you very much for your time. Thanks for being here, and I'm happy to take any questions, any conversations in any breaks. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.